Hello everyone, welcome to the first ever Changemaker Academy. This video series will take you step by step into building your own campaign and create the change that you want to see. My name is Carl Andreasen, and for the next 5 weeks, I will be your host as we delve into the topic of building a campaign strategy. But first, I must admit, I didn't always think that ordinary people could change the world. I thought it was politics or business that created the big changes, until I started learning about social movements and how they create change and how they organize to win and shift society. To delve into that topic more, we have Elżbieta, a sociologist and a women's rights activist from Poland, who will explain to us how movements can build up and create change.
So today we will be talking about quite important issue, how to change the world. You can change the world in many ways. The obvious way is to, let's say, become a politician, right? So you engage in a party, become an MP, and then maybe a prime minister or president. But in fact, that's quite a long way, and not all of us want to be a part of the machinery of state politics. Some say that money changes the world, and that is true, but not always in a good way. What can change the world is people. People who are engaged, who want to make a change, who are purposeful, who act collectively. That's what social movements are about changing the world. And if you think about how, people of color became part of our society with equal rights in the United States, that was a massive effort of a lot of people, thousands of people actually, who worked together in order to make this change happen. So if we think about social movements, what is really important to understand that this is usually a group of people who work together collectively, who have a goal. This goal might be to change something or to prevent a change, such as preventing the climate change. They work outside the system, outside the realm of politics, understood as institutions like parliaments, and they are doing politics by other means. What does it really mean to do politics by other means? That actually means that you are working together in a non-violent way, creative, and that you change the relations of power. I have with me today a couple of artifacts, like this scarf, which has been produced by the Argentinian women's movement working in order to have legal abortion in the country. And this one is a flag of the Polish women strike, which has been instrumental in preventing abortion ban, which was about to be introduced in Poland in 2016. And so on and so forth. We have a lot of examples of those movements, and what's really important here is they have a very specific way of thinking about how power works. Power works through our people, citizens, consent and cooperation. And when we see that the power holders are doing wrong things, when they are unjust, when they are short-sighted, we can withdraw our consent and cooperation. And that's what civil disobedience is about. It's about saying, I am not complying with those who are in power because they are not doing the right thing.
Now, words like movements or big campaigns feels really daunting sometimes. I know that I have a hard time relating to it. Until one day somebody told me that acting local is acting global. That somehow by engaging ourselves in local issues, we can be part of a bigger struggle. And to help us explore that and what that actually means, we bring us to Noélie from the Gasvis Network, talking about how they are connecting the fights against fossil gas across the world.
If we act locally, we act globally. I think is true to a certain extent. I think sometimes people act locally, but they have no connection with what is happening in the next country, regionally, globally, or even in the next village where they're living. And so you are just acting locally, even if what you're doing is important. I think what's really essential and crucial in this sentence is that we need connections between groups. We need connections internationally, globally, and yeah, we live in a world where we can do this more easily than we used to. We can still make sure that local groups feel that they're part of a wider movement. And also the other way around, that wider movements support local groups. It's a two-way. And I think it's something that we can't forget, and that we can't imagine that it just happens on its own, that having these connections is actually a lot of work. And sometimes it's, for example, we're here in Kodrod. People from all around Europe have gathered to fight gas and support the local community that is fighting gas. On top of what we're doing here, we're also meeting one another. We're also finding out about different struggles. We're also going to keep in touch afterwards. My name is Noélie. I'm an activist who's currently based in London, and I'm engaged in a collective called the Gastivist Collective. We started the Gastivist about 1.5 years ago now. We were a group of activists from different parts of the world that really got really concerned about gas, basically. We came from different movements that were fighting coal, that were fighting for economic justice, and we saw that there was a big gap in the movements around gas. So locally, there were lots of citizens or local groups that were starting to fight the construction of new pipelines, of new LNG terminals. And at a European level, there were bigger NGOs that were trying to do policy work, advocacy work, but there wasn't a movement. They were not talking to one another, they didn't know each other, they were not listening to one another. So what we thought was important was to basically get everyone to talk to each other. So try and create a network of people, try and show that if you're fighting an LNG terminal in Sweden, you're also connected to the Italians that are fighting a pipeline that is being built in the south of Italy. So that's what we started doing. We got people in touch, basically. I was working in Brussels in an NGO, and I was doing advocacy work on gas. And I realized that we were never going to make a difference if we couldn't show that there were lots of people fighting locally. The more I was going to advocacy meetings, the more I saw these representatives not really caring about what I was saying, because it was only me and my voice. If I could show that actually locally there were so many people fighting, they would have to take me seriously and they would have to start shifting what they were doing. And I knew that there were local groups fighting, it's just that we were not in touch with them and we couldn't invite them to come and talk, and we couldn't talk about what they were doing. So that's how the Gastivist started. So the United Beyond Gas Tour is a speakers tour that we organised with the Gastivists and other organisations. And we went to visit different infrastructure projects in Europe that were fighting gas, and also different groups that were fighting the companies and the banks funding the system. And we were lucky enough to have an amazing indigenous speaker come with us from Mexico, who was also fighting a gas pipeline in her communities, who came along. And she also said, sometimes local groups feel really small and tiny and isolated, and it's a bit like ants. They're tiny, 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 and they're fighting a huge system. But she was telling us about these ants that they have in Mexico that bite you and that are really scary. And while they're tiny, they can really scare a grown human. And so just to remember that even if we're tiny and we're fighting this massive system, it doesn't mean that we're powerless. We can be very powerful, and that we can be just like ants. We're loads of us and we can make a difference. And I thought that was really beautiful.
Okay, I'm sold. I'm in. I want to build my own campaign. But how do I do that? What steps? What is a campaign really? To help us answer that question, we turn now to Dima, a senior campaigner at Greenpeace, who's going to tell us how they work with campaigns to change the world.
My name is Dima, and I'm a campaigner at Greenpeace. So what is a campaign? A campaign is basically a way for us to change the world towards better. how you're going to change the world, you have to figure out how does the world work. So a very large part of what I do is actually in the beginning of each campaign is to gather information. I have to understand what is the problem, what are the dynamic forces that have led the world to the state that it's in now, where does it seem to be heading to, what are the forces and powers at play that brought about this state of play. And it's very important that I know where I want the world to be. So I have to develop a vision. I have to know what it is that I'm campaigning for. What is this world vision that I'm working towards? Once I have done that, I have to do a pretty thorough analysis in order to understand how the decisions that affect the world work. Who makes the decisions? What is it that motivates the people and the entities that make these decisions? So I need to lay out a clear strategy. So if I want to move this government or this company, what is it that's going to make them want to move? What is it that motivates them towards a different type of behavior than the one that they displayed so far that has brought us to the situation that we have now? So once you have established a vision and once you have done a pretty clear analysis of the forces in play and once you have laid out a strategy, that is when you can start planning the actual tactics, what it is that you want to do. So there are a number of, well, call it weapons in your arsenal or tools in your toolbox, depends how peaceful you're feeling, that you can bring into play in order to move these forces along. All of these, in the end, are about communication. In order to design a good communication strategy, based on the analysis you've done before, you need to also figure out very clearly who it is you're communicating to and what are the messages that will move that particular audience in the direction that you want it to go to. You can work certainly through mainstream media, and you can do that by talking to journalists, writing debate articles, putting out the news. You can try to hook onto the news. There's basically two ways to work with the media. You can ride the wave of already news that exists, and you can create a wave by basically making the news that the media will report on. So pretty typical Greenpeace way of making waves, of course, is doing direct action. I mean, you know, if there's a polluting factory right there, I can certainly write a lot of articles about it that may or may not be printed, but the day that I actually chain myself to the gates and stop the factory from functioning, that will actually be the news that I will have created, and thus created a platform whereby I can talk about the problem and bring that to the attention of the public. Another way to communicate, of course, is direct communication to the people in power. So it's lobbying documents, it is meetings, it is attending conferences, it is attending international meetings, and could be a direct communication also by putting the message in their face in a way that they cannot ignore it. Whether it's a demonstration outside their office, whether it's dropping a banner on the ministry, it's also a way of communicating directly to the people in power. There are other ways to communicate as well that may not be quite as straightforward. Many of them are synthesized in the action of a direct action, in a nonviolent civil disobedience direct action. In a way, it's kind of a microcosm of a campaign. What you're doing is you are, through your own personal, putting your body onto the line between the destruction and the victim, you are both symbolically and really taking an action to stop the destruction, while at the same time using that in order to communicate the need for change. One of the important aspects of campaigning, at least the campaigning that we do in Greenpeace, is empowerment. It's actually, by example, showing people that they're not left at the mercy of large companies or governments, that you have the power to actually change things. Showing people that it's okay to question authority, that it's actually healthy to question authority, that you are the landlord of your universe, that you can determine what it is that your life should be about. That power is what is really going to bring about the change. We can be the catalyst, we can show an example, but in the end, it's when the society changes, it's when the people in it realize their own power and start using it. That's when the changes come about. That's when the magic happens.
Thank you for watching our first video on the Changemaker Academy series on campaign strategy. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to delve deeper into different tools, strategies, tactics, and communication strategies you can use to build up your own campaign. However, first we'd like to hear from you. Please, in the comments below, share with us an example of a campaign or movement that you are inspired by and tell us what makes that movement so effective. And I'll see you next week.